So since this global chaos started, there's been a lot of talk about different student loan forgiveness proposals that are coming out from different people left and right. And if you've been on social media during this time, which I'm sure all of us have, you've probably seen at least one article talking about a student loan forgiveness proposal. So at this point, there have been at least 5 different student loan proposals that have come out and have been in the news. And at this point, it's getting pretty hard to keep up with which proposal is what and all of what's going on, which have made it in which stages of the process, what's actually likely to be passed. There are articles that are probably now being shared that were written back in March or even April. Like, this thing is evolving so rapidly that it can just be really hard to keep up. So in this video, I'm going to be breaking down 5 of the most popular student loan forgiveness proposals that I've seen so far and giving you guys the rundown, the differences, similarities, all the details, so that you can basically know exactly what's going on and not get led astray by fake news on the internet. Hey Wealth Builders, it's Akiva. Welcome back to another episode of The Bemuse, where we are making sense of all things money for the bewildered and confused young adult. So if you're into that kind of stuff, I hope you'll come join the squad by hitting that subscribe button, and while you're at it, hitting the notification bell so that you never miss when we post new videos just like this one. So with each of these proposals, I'm going to go over a few key things. I'm going to talk about who's sponsoring the plan, like whose idea was this, what is the amount of the loan forgiveness or relief in this case, who it's for, the eligible loans under these proposals, whether or not that forgiveness is taxable, and then any just special notes. Once again, as with any super technical, detailed videos that I do have my notes in front of me, so if you see me looking down, that is why. So the first proposal I'm going to talk about is the Opportunity for Heroes Act. This act was sponsored by Representative Ann Cusser, who's a Democrat out of New Hampshire. And this proposal is specifically for essential workers, those who work in essential fields that are really helping or on the front lines, as they say, during this pandemic. So that would include people in the healthcare industry, postal service workers, transit workers, anyone with an essential job. So eligible workers would have all of their federal and their private loans forgiven up to a cap of $25,000. So that would really help a lot of people. And one key thing about this is that even if you don't have any student loans, you happen not to have those, that $25,000 can also go towards college education, continuing education, or vocational training. So you kind of have options when it comes to how you want to use that money. So if, for example, there's an essential worker who maybe they've been thinking about going back to school, now could be their chance if this proposal were to go through. And also, this relief would not be taxable, and so any funds that are received don't have to count that as income on your tax return. Next is the Student Loan Forgiveness for Frontline Healthcare Workers Act. Super long name, don't know why. This one was sponsored by Representative Carolyn Maloney, Democrat out of New York. This one is also for essential workers, but more specifically, healthcare workers. So it would leave out a lot of professions that I mentioned before. It's specifically for frontline healthcare workers treating COVID-19 patients. And with this one, anybody who falls in that category would have all of their federal and private student loans forgiven with no cap. And it also would not be considered taxable. So basically, if you are in the healthcare field, if you're a medical worker and treating COVID-19 patients, basically all of your student loan debt would be forgiven and it would not be taxable to you. Next is what I'm calling the Senate plan. This was one that was sponsored by several different Democratic senators. So this one does not exclude certain professions. It's open to everyone, and it only applies to federal loans in this case. So with this plan, you could get up to $10,000 of your federal student loans forgiven, and that in this case includes direct loans and FFEL loans, which I know a lot of them got left out of the CARES Act that was passed back at the end of March. This student loan forgiveness also would not have been taxable. Now, this is the plan that they were really trying to get into the CARES Act that was passed at the end of March. However, they were unsuccessful in getting that passed. And if you guys want to know what are the current measures in place for federal student loan borrowers, what the CARES Act did include, I have a video, in fact a couple of videos that I did explaining what your options are and what the relief currently in place is. So I will make sure I link that up in the cards so that you can watch and see what you can currently do in terms of managing your student loan debt, specifically federal student loans. So even though this didn't get passed, I just want to put it out there because it is still swarming around the internet, and because, and I'll get to this toward the end of the video, this is actually pretty similar to something that has come up again, a different proposal that is part of the HEROES Act that I'll talk about in just a minute. Fourth is the Student Debt Emergency Relief Act. This one was sponsored by Congresswomen Ayanna Pressley and Ilhan Omar. They were trying to get $30,000 of student loan debt canceled for all federal student loan borrowers. This loan forgiveness would not be taxable under this plan, and if a borrower has more than $30,000 in student loan debt, the federal government would assume payments for the duration of the pandemic. So right now, as we know, student loan payments have been suspended. However, it doesn't mean that the government is paying the loans on our behalf. It's just basically pushing pause on everything. But in the plan, in the Student Debt Emergency Relief Act, they were recommending that the government actually assumes payments, so they would be paying our debt on our behalf. Then the fifth and final plan that I saw swarming around was actually what I'm just calling Joe Biden's plan, because I don't think it really had a name, and this was basically sponsored by former Vice President of the United States, Joe Biden. This one is limited to only attendees of public colleges, HBCUs, and minority serving institutions. And if you want to know what a minority serving institution, or MSI, is, it's essentially what you'd probably think by the name. It is an institution of higher education that serves predominantly minority students. So that would include HBCUs. It also includes Hispanic serving institutions, or HSIs, which are essentially institutions that have at least 25% of its enrollment being Hispanic students. It includes tribal colleges and universities, and it also includes Asian American and Pacific Islander serving institutions, or AAPISIs. So that's something new that I learned during the process of doing research for this video. So it would leave out people like me who attended private colleges, and Joe Biden's plan further limits this relief to federal undergrad loans only. So it only applies to federal loans and only applies to undergrad. So grad school don't count. There would be no cap on this relief, so essentially forgiving all undergraduate federal student loans. However, you must earn less than $125,000 as a single person to qualify for this relief. One important factor in Joe Biden's plan is that any student loan forgiveness would actually be taxable. So that's what makes this plan different from the other four that I mentioned before. So you might get, your $30,000, your $40,000, $50,000 of loans forgiven, but you're gonna have to claim that on your tax return and be prepared to pay that tax bill when it's due. So those are, in a nutshell, 5 of the most popular student loan relief proposals that I've seen floating around the interwebs. It's important to note that none of these proposals that I've talked about have garnered enough support to be passed by the House or the Senate or anything like that. So these are, just as they denote, proposals. They haven't made it anywhere, so don't go planning your life around these things, because these are just proposals, which anybody can really make. It has not made its way into law, hasn't been passed in any way, shape, or form. But I just wanted to clear the air because there are so many different articles out there, just to summarize what is going on so that you're aware of the different things that have come up over the past couple of months. And so you're able to tell fake news from what's really going on and all that kind of stuff. Now let's talk for a minute about recent updates in the student loan forgiveness sphere. So as you may or may not have heard, the US government is in the process of creating a second stimulus package in order to help people out during this pandemic. So the CARES Act was the first major stimulus package that was passed at the end of March. They are now working on a second one, and what I've been seeing in the news is that they are trying to put something to a vote as early as this coming Friday, which is May 15th. Today's definitely the 13th. May 15th. So I actually have my phone here because I'm looking at a letter. So on May 8th, there were 31 members of Congress who signed a letter to Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the U.S. House of Representatives. And in that letter, they had urged her and the House basically to put certain measures into that new stimulus package. They were calling for universal one-time student loan debt cancellation in the amount of at least $30,000. They were also calling for long-term payment relief for all federal student loan borrowers, including making FFEL loans and other types of federally backed loans that were excluded from the CARES Act and now eligible for relief. And they also want them to continue suspending payments through September of 2021, so basically adding on an additional year to the current timeline of student loan suspension of payments, which currently is set to end in September of 2020. They also want to expand protections for private student loan borrowers who were left out of the CARES Act entirely, and provide long-term relief through cancellation and refinancing. So they essentially want borrowers to be able to refinance their debt at lower rates. This letter was signed by Ayanna Pressley, Ilhan Omar, and about 29 other members of Congress. That letter pretty much mirrors what I talked about before in terms of Ayanna Pressley and Ilhan Omar's proposal with the Student Debt Emergency Relief Act. Now that was on May 8th. Now yesterday, May 12th, the House actually came out with their proposed stimulus bill. And so now I just want to talk about the latest update and what they've included in that act, now called the HEROES Act, which I forget what it stands for. The Health and Economic Recovery Omnibus Emergency Solutions Act, or HEROES Act, I really want to know who comes up with these acronyms, provides for $10,000 of across-the-board student loan forgiveness for federal student loan borrowers. So if that sounds familiar, it is. That essentially matches the Senate plan that I talked about earlier, and it also includes $10,000 in private student loan forgiveness. So that's a little bit of a shift. So that's the newest and latest and greatest. We'll see if the HEROES Act actually gets passed. Most people don't feel confident that the HEROES Act is actually going to be passed, but at least now you know the latest updates with regard to student loan forgiveness and what's going on in this landscape. I'm going to leave a few resources down in the description box below just about everything that we've talked about in this video. I also have a link to the letter that I mentioned that was written on May 8th, by Ayanna Pressley, Ilhan Omar, and like I said, 29 other senators to the Speaker of the House with their requests and thoughts with regard to student loan relief and forgiveness during this time. Leave your questions and thoughts down in the comment section below. You guys know we like getting back to as many of you as we possibly can. And if you missed our last video, I have opened up a few spots for people who want to work with me directly on their financial goals. So if your financial goals include getting out of your student loan debt or anything else that you want to work on, I'll also have a link in the description box below where you can set up some time to chat with me and discuss next steps. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so that you never miss when we post new helpful videos just like this one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.